Got 100 steps to go. Tonight I'll make it 99. By rayrae118, Chapter 20. The days before the students were to return to school dwindled, with everyone acclimating themselves to an environment where fear didn't rule, and there wasn't the potential for a Death Eater attack around every corner. Harry and his friends returned to Lion's Castle to gather their belongings, which took nearly an entire day, as things had become so spread out. They were picking up random shirts and books from nearly every corner of the castle. Amelia and Sirius spent a good deal of time at the Ministry, rebuilding and getting the government back up and running in the public eye once more. Minerva spent most of her time at Hogwarts, working with the professors and the board of directors to condense the courses for the shortened term. She had been officially promoted to headmistress as soon as the board could confirm it, and immediately offered Phileas her former place as deputy. She came home a week before school was to start again, and requested a private conversation with both Sirius and Remus. The two marauders were understandably concerned, and only got more confused as the newly proclaimed headmistress asked them to both return to the school to teach. "My goal is to overhaul the Hogwarts curriculum," Minerva explained. "I am searching for a new history professor, but that may take some time. I am also working on updating some courses, such as astronomy and Muggle studies, but again that will take time. For right now, though, I need professors." Sirius frowned. "I don't get it. We both taught defense, and you already have a defense professor." Minerva sighed. "Horace has told me that he wishes to return to retirement, which means I must ask Severus to take on his previous position as potions professor. With my promotion, I find myself in need of a transfiguration professor. And Sirius, after James and Lily, you were the best in your class in that subject." Sirius was startled. He hadn't even thought about that possibility. After a moment of silence, he nodded. "All right, but just for this term. If you really need me back next year, I will do it. But I don't fancy myself the teacher type." Minerva shook her head fondly. "You really have no idea how many students enjoyed learning from you," she said, amused. "Very well. I will endeavour to find someone else for next year. Thank you, Sirius." Sirius inclined his head. "Thanks." Remus bit his lip. "I'd love to return, Minerva, but what about my condition?" Minerva chuckled. "The board has already approved the placement. Something about your defense scores having been the highest recorded in nearly 50 years. Remus flushed. "I'm not sure about that, but I'm happy to return. I love teaching." Minerva smiled gratefully. "Thank you. I would also like to ask you to take over as head of Gryffindor." She looked at Sirius. "I would consider you, but I know you'll wish to continue to reside with your wife at the Bones estate. Not to mention you have already stated you do not wish to take this position long term." Sirius nodded in understanding, and after a moment of shocked silence, Remus stuttered out an affirmative. Minerva inclined her head. "Again, thank you. I shall speak with you soon about arrangements." Remus bit his lip. "There's one more thing, though. Before school starts again, Tonks and I want to get married." Sirius grinned and clapped his friend on the back. "Finally!" he exclaimed. "I don't know why you put it off for so long." Remus shrugged. "We just kept saying we'll do it soon, and then..." He sighed. Yeah. With the war, we just kept pushing it back. But we want to do it this weekend, before the kids return to school. And it just makes more sense now, so that she can move into Hogwarts with me. We don't want anything big, just family and close friends. We're going to ask Amelia to perform the ceremony." "Anyone else you'd like to ask something?" Sirius prompted, a huge grin on his face. Remus rolled his eyes. "I thought it was pretty much implied, but sure. Sirius, would you be my best man?" Sirius's grin got, if possible, wider. "You know it, Mooney." Minerva smiled fondly at her former students and good friends. "Would you like to have the ceremony here?" Remus nodded. We should speak with the house elves about the meal and decorations tonight. Congratulations, Remus. All three of them headed down to the dining room, where the rest of the group was gathered, and shared the good news. Everyone was ecstatic and couldn't wait. Remus and Tonks accepted congratulations with humility, excited to finally be married after so long. Amelia and the Ministry had begun trials for the Death Eaters just a few days after the whole battle at Hogwarts, which meant Sirius and Harry spent most of their days in the large courtroom the Wizengamot used for their sessions. Frank, Druella and Cyrus were likewise occupied. Though Harry had taken on the role of head of House Potter the summer before, he couldn't take over his seat on the Wizengamot until he turned 25. However, he and Sirius both felt that Harry should be there anyway, just in case his presence was needed, and so that he could get an idea of what becoming a member of that council would entail. For some reason, Blaise was also shadowing his mother throughout the trials. One by one, all criminals were sentenced to time in prison. Most of them were life sentences, though a few trials turned up evidence of the Imperious Curse, or other such methods that had forced them to carry out crimes they normally wouldn't even consider. These people, depending on the case, received reduced sentences or probation rather than hard time. There were a few special cases. Snape and Narcissa both had to appear before the Wizengamot to defend their actions, and both received official pardons for their services in the war. By the end of the week, all of the Death Eaters had been dealt with, and the Ministry was breathing a little easier. The building had been mostly cleaned up, and all departments were running relatively smoothly. Amelia's next task was commissioning Order of Merlins. Everyone who fought in the final battle received a third class. Those who had helped significantly more: Sirius, Remus, Kingsley, Snape, Narcissa, Tonks, Andromeda, Ted, Minerva, Fred, George, Bill, Fleur, Frank, Alice, Molly, Arthur, Druella, Cyrus and Cedric received a second class. Cedric had been surprised, since he hadn't thought he had helped much more than anyone else. But Amelia assured him that his actions in organising and leading the DA during the final battle more than warranted the award. Harry and his friends, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Neville, Susan, Luna, Blaise and Daphne, received a first-class award. There was to be an award ceremony at the Ministry the day before everyone would return to school. Harry wasn't exactly looking forward to it, but he knew he didn't have a choice in attending. 2 days before the start of the new term, Remus and Tonks wed in a small, intimate ceremony on the grounds of McGonagall Castle. The guest list was limited, including only their close friends and family. Amelia was there, performing the ceremony. Sirius was Remus's best man, and Tonks asked Ginny to be her maid of honour, to the young redhead's excitement. Andromeda and Ted were ecstatic to see their daughter wed the man of her dreams. Kingsley, Minerva, the other teenagers, Bill, Fleur, Charlie, Fred, George, Augusta, Frank, Alice, Molly, Arthur, Poppy, Snape and Narcissa attended as well. Minerva gave special permission for Phileas, Pomona and Hagrid to enter the grounds so that they could attend the ceremony, as none of them were keyed into the wards. The garden was decorated beautifully in yellows and lavenders. Bunches of the small purple flowers were spread out between the seats and on the altar. It gave off a wonderful spring wedding feel. Remus looked years younger as he stood up in front of the small crowd. Sirius, next to him, couldn't contain his excitement at his best friend's big day. For years he had wanted Remus to find someone to spend the rest of his life with, and he was even happier that the woman was his cousin. Remus had always been like a brother to him, and now they really would be family. Ginny came down the aisle first, wearing a familiar dress. Tonks wasn't the most organised person, and hadn't even thought about a maid of honour until just the day before the ceremony, when Remus had been complaining about Sirius's disappointment that the werewolf wouldn't allow him to throw his best friend a stag party. She'd quickly asked Ginny, but there really hadn't been time to find and alter a dress for her, so she had taken the dress from Bill and Fleur's wedding and charmed it to be lavender-coloured. Harry didn't care what colour the dress was. She looked beautiful in both. When Tonks walked down the aisle, her father on one side, her mother on the other, more than one guest could see Remus choke up, tears of happiness in his eyes. The Auror had chosen to leave her hair in its natural honey colour for the day. The dress was a modified sweetheart neckline with thin off-the-shoulder straps and a T-length A-line cut skirt that accented her curves perfectly. When asked later, Tonks would blush and say she had picked her wedding dress out 2 days after Remus had proposed and kept it in the back of her closet ever since. The ceremony was a blur for Remus, but he was fairly certain he hadn't made any big mistakes, and soon enough he was kissing his new wife to loud applause. Everyone had a great time that evening, dancing, enjoying good food, and relaxing in the pleasant atmosphere. The next day was long and trying for Harry, who had to stay seated in front of a large crowd at the ministry and listen to several speeches about bravery and honour. Amelia had apologised to him in private, knowing how much he would hate this, but knowing that they needed to recognise the achievement. They had just gone through a war, and the wizarding world needed to see its heroes. Truth be told, she hated it nearly as much as Harry, but she understood why it was necessary. Harry did as well, but that didn't stop him from groaning about it in private. At least it didn't until Ginny slapped him upside the head and told him to get over himself, putting on a winning smile, and deal with it. The press was there en masse, and Harry knew the next cover of the Prophet would once more feature him, much to his consternation. Finally, it was over, and they were allowed to go home. Harry immediately threw his Order of Merlin in the drawer, only having taken it out for a moment later by Ginny. She frowned at him. "I know you don't like it, Harry, but you did a great thing. You should be proud of that. This is a recognition of what you have achieved. What we've all achieved." Harry opened his mouth, but Ginny cut him off. "Don't dishonour those who gave their lives to see this day by disrespecting this award or making light of this achievement." Harry sighed reluctantly, but nodded, and let Ginny place the award on his desk. She put hers next to it, and the two headed down to the dining room to join the rest. It was a calm meal, only broken when Minerva asked the teenagers to come to Hogwarts directly in the morning, rather than arrive on the train with the rest. She didn't want to cause any issues, and worried about what their presence might do, especially with the awarding of the Order of Merlins that day, and the article in the Prophet that was sure to follow. The Aurors would patrol the train, but they weren't expecting trouble. Minerva just wanted to use caution. They agreed, and soon after, everyone headed to their separate homes to get some rest. After all, the new term started the next day. Harry and Ginny were early getting ready, even though they knew they wouldn't really need to be at Hogwarts for another few hours. They dressed and headed down to the dining room, their packed trunks in tow. They were soon joined shortly by Sirius and Minerva, and soon after that, the rest of the teenagers. Once everyone had eaten, they all took the Floo to the headmistress's office at Hogwarts, Minerva promising to see them all for lunch, and the group disappeared down through the stairs, heading for the DA lounge, where they all spent the morning reading through textbooks in preparation for the new term, or mock dueling, playing chess, and various other leisurely activities. They ate lunch with the professors in the Great Hall before returning to the lounge. Later in the afternoon, they separated to their respective houses to unpack, before meeting back in the Great Hall just as the train arrived in Hogsmeade. As the students began to arrive, they all flocked around the large group sitting at one end of the Gryffindor table. None of them had been seen on the train, and people were worried. Hugs were passed around between friends, and many people thanked the group in loud voices that echoed around the hall. Harry was nearly bowled over by the combined force of Sheila and Evan, who clung to him tightly, finally letting go of the worry that had cropped up when they hadn't seen him on the train. A short distance away, Hannah almost slammed into Susan when she saw her oldest friend. She had been so worried when Susan had all but disappeared after the battle in December, and she hadn't really been able to talk to her after everything had ended a couple of weeks ago, as Susan pretty much disappeared once more. Susan returned the gesture willingly. She had missed her friend too. Many of their classmates were given the group the same treatment, and after a few minutes, Minerva had to let loose a firecracker from the end of her wand to get the students' attention and ask them to take their seats. The non-Gryffindors all left for their house tables, which was strange for Susan, Luna, Blaze and Daphne. They had been spending so much time with their Gryffindor friends. It would be an adjustment to not do so anymore. They had many of the same classes, but they would be sleeping in different parts of the castle, eating with their own houses, and spending more time in their house common rooms. Minerva waited for a few minutes for everyone to settle down before she addressed the students. She smiled softly, happy to see them all at school once more, safe and no longer living under such an oppressive threat. "Welcome back, everyone," she greeted. "You are all hungry, so I will keep this short. I know you will all be very busy over the next few months. The professors have condensed their classes to contend with the shortened term. The term will run until the last week of July. Final exams, as well as OWLs and NEWTs, will take place in the last week of July and the first week of August. I apologise for the short summer period, but the new year will begin on September 1st, as usual." There was some groaning, and Minerva shook her head knowingly. "I understand. We have decided to include a mid-term break, just a week, in November, because it is not fair to you to have to go so long without a real chance to relax." The students looked happier at that, and Minerva nodded sharply. "I would like to remind you of your head boy and girl, Mr. Potter and Miss Bones. Should you need anything, they are here to help. My last announcement. As you may have noticed, Professor Slughorn is absent. He has decided to return to retirement, so I am happy to announce that Professor Snape has reprised his role as Potions Professor." There was quite a bit of clapping at that, which surprised Snape, as he had never been the most likeable man, even after he had mellowed out in the last few years previously. Minerva smiled. "You may also recognise 2 additions to the staff. Professor Lupin is back to take over the Defence Against the Dark Arts position, as well as the role of Head of Gryffindor." There was a considerable amount of clapping for the professor, who had been one of the best the students could remember. "Professor Black will be taking over for me as Transfiguration Professor." The students cheered loudly for the great defence professor they had had, and Minerva's smile widened. Who would have guessed, when she had been pulling her hair out over that group of pranksters, that 2 of them would have become such role models for the students? When the crowd had calmed down, Minerva continued. "You may also see a woman sitting up here from time to time. Professor Lupin has recently married his fiancée, Aura Tonks. Both will be residing in the castle." There was more cheering for the now tomato-coloured man, though they could all see his proud grin at the mention of his new wife. Minerva glanced back at him and shot him a subtle smirk. "Now, since I have taken enough of your time, please enjoy the meal, and remember, classes start tomorrow morning. You will all receive your schedules at breakfast." Food sprung up on the tables as Minerva sat down, and the hall was filled with conversation as people began talking to their housemates. Many of the Gryffindors tried to ask Harry about what he had been doing since December, but the head boy refused to answer any questions. He wanted to move on, and he didn't think rehashing the war would do any good right now. All of the questions stopped abruptly when Lavender shrieked loudly. Most of the table, as well as a good portion of the other students in the hall, turned to look at her. She was pointing at Ginny's left hand, which had stopped midway as she reached for a roll. "Oh my God!" she screamed. "When? How?" Ginny retracted her hand and looked at Harry. The 7th year shrugged, smiling down at his wife. Fiancée to most of the hall, since they didn't know of the bond. "We're going to get married this summer, once Ginny turns 17. They received congratulations from most of their housemates, many of whom also asked if they were invited, which rather annoyed the couple. Finally, Harry put an end to the questions. "We haven't begun planning yet, but I just want a small ceremony. Family only. I'm sorry." People expressed disappointment, but thankfully didn't press further and returned to their meals. Eventually, everyone had eaten their fill and began a mass exodus of the hall, heading to their common rooms. Harry gave the Gryffindors the password, Victory, and they entered the common room. "It feels weird to be back here," Dean commented idly, looking around the comfortable room. It had been cleaned up well, and it was impossible to tell that the Death Eaters had trashed it after taking over the castle. "Tell me about it," Ron grumbled. "I can't believe we have to be in school all summer." Hermione rolled her eyes. Grow up, Ron! We're graduating in August, so it's not like you have to be back here September 1st, like the younger years. Ron brightened considerably. True, he replied, to general amusement. Most of the house crowded in the common room for a while longer, talking and laughing. It was so strange, and so wonderful, to not have to fret about family members who may be in danger, about being in danger themselves. For the first time for many of them, they could just be children. They didn't have to worry about a war and whether or not they would be reading about a relative's death or disappearance in the paper the next morning. Finally, after several hours, Harry suggested that they all try to get some rest. When people began protesting, he shook his head. It's been a while since we've been in a structured school setting. It's going to take some getting used to. And no one will be able to do much learning if you're falling asleep in class tomorrow. There was more grumbling, but the students began to trickle upstairs, willingly, seeing the wisdom in his words. It had been months since they had to live by a set schedule of classes. It would be an adjustment, but many of them were looking forward to it, strangely enough. Harry and Ginny spent a few more minutes in the common room, saying goodnight to Ron, Hermione and Neville, before the couple disappeared into Harry's single room. Looking around the spacious room that Harry had as head boy, Ginny smiled softly. It's good to be back, she commented mentally. Harry glanced over at her and drew her into a hug, kissing the top of her head lovingly. It is, he nodded. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one. I'm liking this. They're starting to settle back in. And they're not in danger anymore. As they said, they can just live, which is so nice. I kind of wish we'd seen Umbridge's trial and her trying to talk her way out of it. That would have been quite funny, but I won't ask for more than what I've received. Do you have any idea how hard it is to find a multi-part series that's complete like this, with all the couples you ship, or it can convince you to ship couples you don't normally? It's really rare, and this goes all the way to the finale, so I won't moan or groan. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.